I have the advantage here, and I want you to have this advantage of knowing something about Zack's background. While he's deep into the social justice work of here and now, um, he he didn't just arrive at that point out of the blue. Could you could you give us a sense of your own personal history? It's not just about social justice. You have a rather unique background, I think. Maybe not unique, but pretty unique.
Yeah.
Growing up in Los Angeles, and how you came to be exposed to a wide variety of things here in this ultimately amazing place that is Los Angeles.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. I think racial justice issues are very personal to me. My dad was born in a refugee camp in southern Germany, a displaced persons camp, and came to America when he was 3. And I understand that I wouldn't be here if things had turned out differently in the European genocide, right? Of Romani folks, of Jewish folks, of Slavs, of everybody. And so I feel like I have a duty almost to talk about how the Jewish Holocaust relates to the Black Holocaust, relates to the Native American Holocaust, and that there's not just hate and a lack of teaching and education that goes on in a society, but also people were killed for profit, and that there was profit motive to this, and it's kind of the ugly underbelly of capitalism that can lead to these terrible things. So it's not just, as we all know on this call, when we talk about social justice, it's not just about getting pushing for rights for certain folks, but it's also about the scariness of slipping into a kind of dystopian society that like Cambodia, Rwanda, these things happen. Samantha Power chronicles it, comparative genocide around the world. So I come to teaching history almost as a medicine for myself to understand the madness that can happen when humans, quote unquote, go wrong. So I have dedicated my career and my interests to understanding how we can try to educate not only in the classroom, but also as an administrator, how I can challenge certain systems of oppression on the lines of race, class, and gender, and understanding that this important work not only happens in the classroom, but also happens in bureaucracy.
But one of the things that for those of you who may not be so familiar with Community Works Institute and our purpose and focus, place-based education and focusing on the place that we occupy, we live, we walk through, temporary or permanent spaces is hugely important to us in connecting students to that. And part of Zack's story that I find particularly intriguing, this is a dad story. Your dad had a particularly interesting position for many years in Los Angeles, which, that's a whole other story. Los Angeles is an interesting and rather strange place that likes to create images of itself that are not always particularly accurate.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And it's a place of reality and illusions all at the same time, which you say, Zack. And your dad was a city planner, but
right.
he took you on some excursions, I think.
That's right.
Excursions around the city. What about that? How did that influence where you're at?
Yeah. So I should say that my grandparents were in Auschwitz and Gross Rosen and Flossburg and other concentration camps. So that sparked the interest in history through, dialogue with my grandmother and hearing the stories from her, and then then I wanted to explore history more. And then that interest in history and city planning and how certain parts of the cities grow and how certain parts of cities die, proverbially speaking. My dad was a city planner. He would drive me and my brother around, showing us different sights and sounds. And I think, he grew up in the Crenshaw area, which was Japanese, Black, and Jewish. And then he obviously Crenshaw changed over time, and so he would tell me about how these areas change when white flight happens, and when you know, quote unquote urban renewal and gentrification, and how money flows and how money doesn't flow. What happened after the 65 Watts uprisings, and then the 92 Rodney King uprisings, and how a city can sometimes sweep things under the rug and not fund public education, and have folks go to their suburbs and sequester themselves and their wealth. And I think learning these stories as a young kid made me think, man, maybe I should, when I grow up, maybe I should try to do something about this and work with other folks to make a positive change in society. And again, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom.
And somehow or other, you're kind of a poster guy for poster child for what place-based education, what really being connected to your community. I see you that way. I'm
Right,
like,
right.
how did that happen with Zack? And yeah, your dad gets a big piece of credit for that.
Right.
And then you moved on past your dad, right? And out from that. And how can we do that? Well, why should we do that for our students? How do we create the circumstance that fosters that with our students in our schools? Why and how?
Yes. So I went to LAUSD public schools. Shout out to University High School, Emerson Middle School, Westwood Elementary School. These places made me. And they were very multiracial, multi-class. And I got to see dynamics play out from a young age of who belongs, who doesn't belong. I used to go to Hebrew school on the weekends, and those students were, they went to private schools, and they didn't have the same experience I did at public schools. So most of my friends at public schools were Black and brown working class folks. And then the Jewish Hebrew school was, you know, upper middle class and upper class white Jewish folks, Ashkenazim. And so I quickly got to understand how neo-segregation works, and the effects that it has on people's trajectory in their lives. So how do we bring that into our work in classroom spaces? I had a teacher at University High School named Rick Takagaki. I'm still friends with him. And he would talk like my father. And so he was, he would talk like you, Joe. You know, he was very matter of fact and F the man and, you know, stick it to him and all that kind of good stuff. And he taught us US history, but he would teach us the not so pretty side of US history. So he says, oh, everyone, you know, this class likes the Dodgers, but do you know about Chavez Ravine, right? And pushing people out. And this is eminent domain. And then he would go on to a lesson about eminent domain and taking land, you know, for not that much money from working class Latinx folks. And so he would start with a factual kernel of, hey, did you know? Like, this is something you already know and care about. Now let me tell you the other side of things. And I think that's how I teach my classes. I teach a Jewish history class from Oive to Obama, is what it's called at University of Redlands. And then at UCLA, I teach Redlands. I taught The Revolution Might Be Televised, social justice history through music and movies. So I think I try to latch on to something that students are passionate about, whether it be something in social media, you know, like a hip hop star, a pop star, whatever, and then take that song, take that film clip, and then start teaching from it. Because if you just dump a bunch of stuff on people of like Aristotle and Socrates and all these old European guys, it doesn't connect with folks as well. But start where they're at, and then you can weave in different narratives through it, just like Takagaki did with us. I mean, he played songs. He was the first guy that, you know, had us check the back of our shirts and see where our clothing was made. And then he was, okay, we got Bangladesh, we got China, we got all the, Indonesia, Vietnam. He's like, well, why aren't your clothes made in the US? And I think for a young kid, that was really impactful for me to think, oh, that's what my dad was saying about we're not going to buy that toy gun because it's made in China, and we're shipping our jobs overseas, and these deeper social issues. Both my father and Rick Takagaki, and even Steve Perez, another teacher at middle school, they took things that were really important to my life, and that, like the shirt off your back, and made you think critically about them. And I think that's what I and a bunch of my friends try to do in our classes.
When you were in grade school and high school, middle school, high school, I'm guessing you had some great teachers, but I'm guessing that what you're describing was not a prominent part of the curriculum, except in bits and pieces.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, history was, I had some great history teachers, and I think I was lucky in that regard. There's those books about all the stuff your history teachers didn't teach you. But I think I was lucky in that I did have teachers that gave us the canon of all the old European guys, but then also went into Gil Scott Heron and Amiri Baraka and Audre Lorde, and I got these great thinkers that were not white. And again, Rick Takagaki introduced me to Malcolm X. And,
you got that in high school?
Yeah.
That's unusual, I would proposition.
Yeah. No.
Gil Scott is not necessarily a major theme in United States high schools.
That's true.
You, sorry, Zach, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were on a very good riff there.
No, I mean, I think we as educators right now, I think a lot of folks that maybe aren't as familiar with these issues are saying, okay, I'm watching TV, I'm seeing the murder of George Floyd, the near murder of Jacob Blake, and murder of Breonna Taylor, all these terrible things. What can I do as a teacher? What's my role? Because I'm not Black and I'm not Latinx, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think for folks that are listening, that are passionate about bringing something new to their classroom, and maybe you're not a history teacher, maybe you're a science teacher, or maybe you're a math teacher. First start reading books, right? And educating yourself, because you don't want to go in and do the wrong thing in your classroom. So what are people reading now, right? Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I think you want to be an anti-racist teacher, and being neutral about things is not going to perpetuate anything good. Robin DiAngelo, right? White fragility. People have been talking about that for a while now, and now she's getting some criticism because people are saying, hey, you're this white woman that's talking about whiteness. There's been a lot of Black and brown scholars that have been saying this for years, but they didn't get any attention, and it's true. But if you're a teacher that's interested in this stuff and you're just not sure where to start, cool, you're here or you're listening. And talk to other teachers that are successful at this. How do they weave in material in chemistry, in biology, in marine biology? I actually had a teacher in marine biology who made us start thinking deeply about what we're doing to the oceans and fishes, how that affects our food production lines differently in India, in Brazil. And what does this mean in terms of race, class, gender, with environmental racism, right? So tying in race, class, gender issues, even with mathematics, right? Into finances, into how banks loan to folks. it's not just about taking that quote unquote diversity class. This material, this anti-racist, like, anti-classist, anti-sexist material, I think needs to be across all different disciplines.
The I'll suggest a possible direction here, and we can go as far as we need to go. The big C that often isn't talked about by Ibram and a number of people is capitalism.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the no-go line in so many cases. And I'm not trying to lead you here, but in terms of, the situation with people around class and the ability to move, from class to class. And, Howard Zinn comes to mind. You can't be neutral on a moving train. And this is something that's incredibly uncomfortable, not to mention new for a lot of teachers. It's territory to be trod carefully in this country. Can you talk about ways to trod that territory? It's so closely related to racism. It's so closely related to social justice. And I think for a lot of teachers, it feels like a no-go territory. I'm not really just talking about capitalism, but this social economic structure that we live in, and enabling students to step back and take a larger picture of things. How's that, Zach?
Yeah. No, you're not asking me to bite off too much there.
Well, do what you can with it.
I'm joshing you. Isabel Wilkerson just wrote that book, Caste.
Sure.
And I think it's required reading because it is taking a big magnifying glass to our own society, and saying, we look at, Indian Hindu society, right? Because it's not in Indian Muslim society, but in Hindu society, historically, there's been a caste system with Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Sudras, right? Kshatriyas. These folks are out to lunch. And then she moves away from India, the caste system there. And then she moves to Nazi Germany. And we obviously know there was a racial and caste and class system there. And we know the ugliness of it and how it operated. But then she does a really genius thing and says, well, what about American society? We have a caste system here. And our caste system is so non-dynamic that the Nazis borrowed from us, that the Nazis created the Nuremberg laws based off of the Jim Crow South laws of Black person can't marry a white person, just like a Jewish person couldn't marry an Aryan person. And even the notion of Native American reservations, that idea was taken by the Nazis. And they said, that's a great idea of subjugating people. Let's create these things called concentration camps that are modeled off of Native American reservations. So Isabel Wilkerson, who also wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, and doesn't use the word race or racism once in that, she's talking about a caste system. She does a great job of helping us look at our own caste system. And I think a lot of institutions, maybe even teachers, like to say that it's really just about finances and money, and let's not look at race. But I think something that's interesting is for as long as we can remember, we've tried to be blind to class, right? I don't see class, brother, right? Which is not true. I think it's only recently, as we've started to, whatever, in the 90s and now in the wherever we're at now, race, blind to race, right? I don't see color, brother, right? And people calling out race is now, I think, making folks say, we've always seen class. We just don't talk about it, just like we always see race and we always see gender. We just don't talk about it. And so, surprise, surprise, when young folks are taught not to talk about history, politics, race, sex, etc. They have issues when they get older. But to zero in on what you're talking about, what can you do in the classroom if you want to talk about class and capitalism? I've seen excellent group activities where I went to a conference and they had a whole room set up. You get a card, and that card is your identity. And you got to go to this station over here, which is the bank. Well, depending on your identity, the bank denies you a loan. Okay, well, now I guess I'll go to school. You go to school, but the school denies you because you're not the right identity, right? Uh-oh, something happened. You have to pay a car fine. So you have to go to the police department and pay that car fine. And you see what I'm doing here, right? They're modeling what society is really like. And so depending on the identity that you were given at the door to this conference auditorium, you now play the game of life that you can set up in your classroom and model to your students that there is a myth of meritocracy. This is not a fair society. Many societies are not fair, but ours is quite stratified in terms of wealth accumulation. And I think it's a good place for students to start thinking that about the world that they're going to go into as adults, but the world that they are going through now as young people. They can feel that it's not fair, but when they're adults and their mentors gaslight them and tell them that everything's hunky-dory and fine, that creates great trauma and great mental distress, which never goes away.
Well said, Zach. And you teach a number of social justice oriented courses at UCLA and at University of Redlands and other places. Can you give us some examples of some of your, like, I don't know, most kind of exciting moments as a teacher when your students really got traction around something that belonged to them, that you set in motion, but it belonged to them and they were really off to the races with something very personal? How's that? I know you've got stories.
I like that a lot. You know, before I get there, I should also say, I think being a white, Jewish, hetero, cisgender male, as teachers, we bring our identity to the classroom. And so I think in the classroom, I think white students hear me in a certain way. I think white Jewish students hear me in a certain way. And I think Black and brown students hear me in a certain way, and Asian folks. And so I just want, I think, people on the call know this, but maybe if someone's new to this, understand that you being in that space is already a political statement. And it's already a race, class, gender statement, because you've been kind of stamped and certified by an institution to be in that space. And so you have the power to make it a revolutionary space or a non-revolutionary space. And I think some of our white allies and accomplices sometimes can be analysis paralysis, can be paralyzed by what are they to do with their identities and their white skin. I think, again, read books, educate yourself, because you being a white teacher who is talking about dismantling white systems can be very, very impactful for young folks across all different races and ethnic backgrounds. So just keep that in mind. If you're a white person doing anti-racist work in a classroom, it's important to be vocal about it and also bring in folks that don't look like you so that students can get a variety of voices that you may not also be able to bring as a white person. A moment that was a aha. The revolution might be televised, social justice history through music and movies. the midterm at University of Redlands was you had to make your own music video. So the students had to make their own music video about a chapter from environmental. We were on the environmental movement. We did a bunch of different movements, labor movement, drug legalization movement. And the students had a lot of fun with it because they did like, you know, whatever, Tupac songs, Drake songs, you know, Britney Spears songs, but then they changed the lyrics to make it be to fit the topic of environmental racism or you know, the air quality in China being terrible, and then how we can try to ameliorate some of these carbon emission issues. And it was just a fun thing because I saw them having fun with it. They were embarrassed that their music video was on the board, so to speak. But it's that intersection of artistic creativity. They made it their own. They used pop culture, which is something that they were excited about, but they combined it with something that was socially conscious. And that's I don't know. Those are the things that I know are going to stay with the student, right? They can write a big paper that whatever is well done, but they're not going to remember that. But when they create, you know, it's like the stuff that at CWI, right? When people film their experience of walking down the street and talking with a complete stranger, and they have a beautiful kind of Martin Buber I thou moment, that's priceless. That's the magic. And so I think when you have those moments in your class of magic, and there's also an artistic product that lives on that they can watch later, they'll never forget that, okay, maybe I should eat less cows and eat less animals, and, you know, try to help out communities that have food deserts.
Right. Martin Buber, I thou moment.
Yeah.
Zach. So you were with us. I don't know if you have any stories. You were with us. One of the things that we do during the institutes that we do, we have an institute coming up in January, and the 2 summer institutes. And traditionally, they've been in the streets. And have to say, the last time we were in the streets is weird. It was in Brooklyn, in Gowanus, Brooklyn, in late February, right before the tsunami of COVID hit.
Yeah.
And we was there, and we were out on the streets, you and Darren, and
yeah.
we were all out on the streets with these teachers from schools in New York City. Do you have any stories from that? I mean,
I do. Remember, it was a Martin Buber, you know, and for those folks that don't know Martin Buber, he's a Jewish philosopher and thinker who was talking about, you know, I can have an Uno deck, right? Uno cards. And this is a it relationship, because this is a it to me, right? I play with the cards when I want to, and then I put it down, but I don't have a romantic relationship. I don't have a spiritual connection with the cards. It. But what happens when we have a I-thou relationship, right? So let's say Joe and I, right? We were strangers, and then I forgot. Oh yeah, Matt Cedillo connected us, and then we talked on the phone, and immediately I was like, this guy's really cool, and he's witty, and he's intellectual, and he's sarcastic, and he gets it, and he gets me, and this is an interesting thing. And then it became a I-thou relationship, which Martin Buber is saying is a higher spiritual realm, you know, whether you believe in God or not, but just a higher spiritual realm of, I am connecting with a human. I care now deeply about Joe Brooks, whereas, I mean, I still care about my Uno deck, but I think my feelings for Joe, I will show up for Joe, and I will do, you know, talks and collaborate with Joe, but not so much with the Uno deck. Those are the I-thou relationships that I'm sure everyone on the call has built with their students, with their staff, with hopefully other teachers and administrators, maybe not as much with administrators because sometimes that can be difficult. But but yes, that's the I thou relationship. Now, getting back to the question, I remember I was coughing on the plane, and I'm sure they would have
You
scared
had,
me off
you
now.
had COVID on that plane, and we both know it.
It was just a cold, everybody. I'm not a vector. So, I think it's like, it's always the recess moments, being on recess or being at lunch. And I think when you set us out to go explore Brooklyn to talk to folks on the street, basically. So we went to this taco joint, and we were talking to the person about what it's the cashier of what it's like to live in Brooklyn. And I'll never forget, I'm a very visual learner, and she said something that was strange and cool, which is, this is my home, I love it here, but there is like two different worlds here. There are those that have money, and then there's the rest of us. And it reminded me of like How the Other Half Lived, right? That famous book. And she said this thing that was just visually stunning of like, I also feel like there's too many buildings, and it's putting pressure on the earth, and there's too many people right in one spot, and is that hurting the earth? And I thought it was a cool, weird thing to think about that I never thought about. To have too much pressure on one part of the earth, that it's not going to cave in. But just the notion of talking with someone else about how they view the world and how it's different for them. And then she had all these stories about what it means to be a working class person in Brooklyn, and it didn't sound so fun. But she was the transition generation for her family, and she was going to college, whereas her parents hadn't, and she was working in her parents' store, taco store. So it and we all were just fascinated by talking to her. Not to fetishize or exoticize other folks, because that's not what we're about. But I think the social awkwardness was broken through, because we were able to actually have an authentic conversation with her, because we were like, oh, we're just doing this for class. And then she was like, okay, cool, let's talk. But I think if it was just a normal conversation, we wouldn't have gotten that deep, because of what you had primed us for in the morning session at the CWI session.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, the human connection thing is what you're talking about. And it's often at its best and predictably unexpected.
Yeah.
Unexpected. And we hear that over and over again. In terms of, I just want to go back real quickly, Zach, I know you've told me stories. I know it's often hard to pull them out on a spur of the moment. You've told me stories about your students that have done projects out of your classes. Mm-hmm. Are there any others that you think we would take note of where, I think the ones that I'm always interested in, I suspect all of us are, the ones where students start in a certain place, like adults start in a certain place, and end up someplace unexpected.
Yes. We live in a very social media world. We live in a Twitter sphere and an Instagram sphere. And our students are so smart, right? And they are just sponges taking in all this stuff. And I'm guilty of this as well. But they take in all this stuff, especially in my area in terms of history, but it becomes very surface, right? Because that famous quote from, Martin Luther King of the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But you don't know the other parts of the speech, right? Or Audre Lorde, we can never destroy the master's house with the master's tools. I think something I've found exciting with my students is taking something that they know and that they're familiar with, and then they read or they watch the whole speech and they see it in its full context, and then they compare it to another great thinker. For example, Martin Luther King, March on Washington, they all know I Have a Dream speech. But then again, like Rick Takagaki, I take that one fact that they know and I say, okay, but did you know Bob Dylan played at the March on Washington? Oh, okay, cool. Did you know the guy who spoke right before the I Have a Dream speech? Oh, okay, wow, he was the rabbi from Berlin, Rabbi Prince, who had to get out of Berlin because they were killing, Jews. Wow, okay, that's interesting. And then there's Black Jewish solidarity. Okay, well, what happened to Black Jewish solidarity now? And then, we can go through history, and I'm actually doing a talk next week, I think, about Black Jewish history. And so you start getting people curious and interested. Wait, why did Malcolm X call MLK, quote unquote, Uncle Tom or a sellout? Okay, well, we need to read, what is it, Letter to the Underground, right? Where Malcolm X is calling out the big five that met with Kennedy about Ralph Abernathy, right? A. Philip Randolph, so on and so forth, Wilkerson, that they were, they watered it down too much at the March on Washington. And actually, John Lewis, God rest his soul, were going to pull the plug on his mic. They were ready to pull the plug on his mic because they thought the boy from Troy, quote unquote, was too radical, and that they didn't want him to go speak in the March on Washington, and that they had all these other speakers that they were going to speak in the March on Washington, but that Kennedy was like, no, that's too radical. And so then you have Malcolm X from the outside saying, all you guys are sellouts because you are kowtowing to the white man. And this is just, a racial parade. So I saw students who knew a little bit about the history have super aha moments where it's like, oh, cool. So you played that song, played that speech. Actually, I want to play or show you this piece of art, right? Because we're very visual people. And then history comes alive, right? And folks on the call, your subject matter best, but when chemistry comes alive, we get folks like Bill Nye, who's like blowing up stuff on TV and making a music video out of it. And it's funny. So you're laughing, you're crying, you're learning, you feel happy about something, and then it sticks in your brain. Oh yeah, Bill Nye was talking about greenhouse gases. Oh, Al Gore was talking about greenhouse gases. And then the dominoes keep falling, and as more people in your life talk about these things, then it becomes more aware to you that, oh, FDR, yeah, New Deal. Okay, but it was not good for folks of color. Okay, and then you get the historical background, and you step into the present day, and you're like, okay, now let me roll up my sleeves, and what can I do now that I know the history, and now we're in the present day, how do we make a better future?
So it sounds to me, Zach, like what you're promoting, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, it sounds to me like what you're promoting is a continual unpacking and revision of where we think we should be going, versus like these prepackaged notions of social justice or some other thing. And I'm not going to name authors and books, but people tend to latch onto, I'm not going to name anyone. Mm-hmm. They tend to latch onto the latest, greatest thing, and they're off to the races. And I think what I'm hearing you advocate for is, a continual re-examination of all of that.
Yeah.
And giving our students, I mean, it used to be, well, it's not that long ago, and I guess it's still present, the idea of, some sort of media sophistication, some sort of ability to unpack media, and that's certainly really valuable. But even within certain progressive circles, to not get locked into one person's kind of path forward, but to keep moving sideways and looking at a lot of different vantage points.
Right. I agree with that. I took a critical media studies course at UCLA with Doug Kellner, and that really just blew my mind, and I loved it because we were watching MTV, which I grew up on. I know I sound like a dinosaur now, but we would dissect MTV and show how it's programming our brains. He compared it to the Frankfurt School in Germany. But this notion of, okay, conditioning folks to think this body type is great and to think that this wealth bracket is great and these kind of cars are amazing, and this kind of teaching capitalism through pop culture. So the Frankfurt School was talking about how Disney teaches people to be good capitalists because it's these subliminal messages, right? It's not so blatant, but the prince needs to get the princess and then needs to get the castle and needs to gain the wealth and do the thing. And this is the ladder that you should take in society. And Song of the South, okay, these bears that somehow resemble black folks they're bad, and these crows in Dumbo are bad. And so it's these subliminal messages that was actually Walt Disney's.
Did you just seriously reference Song of the South and Dumbo in the same sentence with crows and bears?
Yeah, man. Look, they're redoing the Disney Splash Mountain if it ever opens again, because Splash Mountain is racist, right? Because it's yeah.
Oh my God, I watched. We're not going to make a story out of this, but I watched Dumbo with my son when he was, I don't know, 2, something like that, and I was just kind of shocked. Yeah. And then there were the guys that were setting up the circus. These large black men setting up a circus, and then you've got, not to even go there, the Pinocchio scenes,
right,
and on and on and on.
Right.
And
and this is the thing that you asked me about capitalism earlier. Whoever has the power and the money usually sets the societal narrative. And so Walt Disney was a big anti-Semite, just like Henry Ford, and also anti-Black and anti-Latinx. And so we see it play out in the cultural products that are put out. And also Walt Disney attended some American Nazi gatherings,
Sure.
right? And was the only guy to let in Leni Riefenstahl, Hitler's Nazi propagandist filmmaker, right? That made Triumph of the Will. So it's not, we don't learn the history just to say F all these old white guys because they're all bad. I mean, maybe that's true, but the point is critically analyze history, critically analyze law, right? Critical race theory, Derek Bell analyzed our legal system to understand how we create a better society. The whole thing is not just to demonize everything from the past and say it all sucks, let's burn it all down.
Right.
We can incrementally dismantle some of the stuff, and then we have to build back something better.
Right. And it goes without saying that the animation was utterly brilliant, although they were a very anti-union shop. Let's not go.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you've got the Pocahontas thing and so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay. So we could go on about Disney. Zach, I want to thank you so much, but you're not quite done yet.
Yeah.
We've got a group on Facebook that we're trying to monitor, and we have some folks here in our originating broadcast, if you will, through Zoom. And I'm just going to name a few folks offhand. Christine, Tijuana, Martina, would you like to engage with Zach in particular questions that you may have? Anything you'd like him to address? I have plenty of follow-up thoughts, but I wanted to pause and see if we had any questions, thoughts, pieces.
And if you don't feel comfortable verbalizing it, you can type it in the chat box, and then we can.
We could text it, and we'll just sort of morph it into a question to Zach.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead and think about that. And Zach, with the few remaining minutes that we have, what we're hoping to do, and I would tease everyone with this, is that we're hoping, we've been talking, you and I, about evolving a series of, I'm not sure we'll frame it as social justice per se, but a series of continuing conversations. You're well connected to folks across the United States and beyond. And there's a community of us that are very dedicated to this. We'd like to invite folks to look for continuing opportunities. And Zack will be hosting over the upcoming months a series of interviews, conversations is a better word, I think.
Yeah.
With folks who are involved in this work, and very much focused on the idea of how do you bring it into the classroom, if you will. How do you bring it into the learning experience with students? So look for those opportunities as we go ahead. Closing comments, Zach. What would you leave us with? Like, any big ideas?
Well, something I'm grappling with right now is watching the election results, and it looks like Biden's going to squeak out an electoral college victory. But what does it mean that 68 million plus Americans voted for Donald Trump again after the last 4 years that we've had, which is, in my mind, really based on a lot of casual cruelty, right? It's just the way that he's ruled has been really casually cruel, if not just cruel. And it reminds me of the stories from my grandmother, right? To bring this conversation full circle, that not only my grandmother, but also a famous scholar at UCLA, Val Rust, who taught one of my classes and got his PhD in the 50s, and was looking at denazification of Germany. And so what do you do in a society that has just been taken over by a very strange ideology and has had a lot of trauma, and in their case, killings, right? Mass killings. You have to denazify the society, and you have to re-educate folks to not hate each other. And is this a moment in American history where, I don't know if you would call it denazifying America, but
maybe, Zach, are you, yeah, because no, you and I talk a lot. I think what you're looking for, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is a way to rebuild human connections.
Yes.
And to be able to listen to each other beyond political positions.
Right.
Or I would say seeming political positions.
Right.
And reconnect with each other, because, I mean, it seems to me, with a few years under my belt, anyone that doesn't see the need for that is not paying attention.
Right. I agree. I mean, we're not having the conversation anymore of well, I think they should, spend this much money on education. Well, I think they should spend this much money on education. The conversation in terms of casual cruelty is, Joe, I hate your guts, and I hope you fall off a bridge. That doesn't kind of advance social anything, right? Discourse, and we become very hateful very quickly. And someone was saying, America's threat in terms of, geographically, we're on this, kind of big continental island. America's real threat is ourselves. And we have torn ourselves apart in these last 4 years. And we've always been super racist. It's just, we've never had a president that was just so openly vocal about it. They were more surreptitious about it. But that it's so open and vocal, and people still go along with the program is quite concerning. So as educators, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. I'm not sure where this comes from. It might be a Fireside Theater reference, but we have met the enemy, and they is us.
Yeah. Which I know we got to go, but Jordan Peele, brilliant you know, entertainer and educator, right? Edutainment, made the movie Us, right? So just like what you said, you know, it's a horror film about us because we are killing us and our doppelgangers, right? And it's about class too, because it's the version of Zack that lives above society and the Zack that lives in this kind of underworld. And what happens when the two meet? It's almost like what Obama says, like what we should appeal to our better angels, Obama, and then you get a guy Trump, let's appeal to our better devils. And then, you know, you have voters who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump, and I don't know if I'll ever understand that. But what do we do now as America when we is us and us is we?
Say that again. When we is us and us is we.
Yeah, yeah. And we look, we hate each other. We hate each other.
When we is us and us is we. Zack, I think you have your next book title.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to wrap up now. Zack, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles, California. And we want to thank all our folks on Facebook and here at Zoom. And we're going to continue the conversation. Look for updates and further opportunities for conversation, because at the end of the day, talking about things that matter is what matters, right?
I think you just got your new book.
Thanks, Zack. We're gonna close now, and thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
All right, everybody, take it easy.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.